Welcome to today's video. In today's video, we are talking about if a 24 to 70 millimeter lens is actually good enough to do a portrait shoot with. And we're gonna be doing that in a studio. So let's hop into it. So recently, my friend and I, Stefano Lombardo, hopped on into a studio with Amanda Lee to basically take a look at the 24 to 70 millimeter and see if we could actually get some good portrait photos with it. A lot of people will think that you need an 85 millimeter for portrait shoots and that you probably want a bit of a better depth of field than 2.8 to have, 1.4 or 1.8. But from personal experience, I can say that this lens does hold up. Obviously, we are going to be missing some certain things that a prime lens will have an advantage for us on, especially with portraits, but a 24 to 70 f2.8 definitely is a monster, and there are several reasons why. So in today's video, I will be talking over the B-roll with my opinions about a 24 to 70 and give you a few reasons why and why you shouldn't actually get a 24 to 70 millimeter for your portrait sessions. So let's jump into it. You can take a look at some of the photos, and then we'll talk about the first thing that I actually like about a 24 to 70.
Nice. Good.
Yeah,
So good.
So the first thing that I want to talk about is the extreme versatility of this lens. The fact that you can shoot from 24 millimeters to 70 millimeters gives you an unbelievable range of subjects that you can shoot. And the way that I get the best use out of that for portrait sessions is setting the scene with my subject, figuring out where I want them, and taking a lifestyle photo where I can actually show the background and the environment that they're in, and then punching in and getting that really good portrait shot that you would typically take with an 85 millimeter. And then of course you have the ability to play around with a 35 millimeter and a 50 millimeter focal length. Really the best part is that you can go from 35 to 50, stay at f2.8 on the fly. And so that's really the main reason why you want a lens like this, is because you don't have to change lenses. You have them all in the kit. Your aperture is basically just low enough that you still get that effect for your creamy background and depth of field separation. And then if you did want to take a portrait shot like you would with an 85, you just crank it right over to 70 millimeters and you basically have that effect.
Oh, you know what? Good catch. Like, what if we did like you on the chair and you're kind of like, like one of those? Let's try that.
Yeah.
I'm feeling it. I think it's gonna be good.
So now the second thing that we need to talk about is obviously its f2.8 aperture and if it really affects your photos. And I want to highlight this with comparing it to actually if you were to go with an f4 lens instead of f2.8, and then talking about specialty primes. I think a lot of people will decide to not buy an f2.8 lens because a good kit lens that you can get for any camera really is going to come at f4. So what's nice about having a 2.8 is you do get those extra stops of light that definitely come in handy when you are shooting in low light. But for portraiture, is an f4 kit lens versus an f2.8 kit lens really going to make that much of a difference for you that you're going to need those extra 2 stops to either get that depth of field separation in the background or ensure that you have enough light where you don't have to crank your ISO up so high because there isn't enough light in the space that you're shooting in. So really the first consideration with that is, in my experience, the 2 stops actually does make a difference, because I anticipated that there would be a lot of clouds in the sky that would affect the amount of daylight that actually is brought into the studio. And if I didn't have f2.8 and I decided to bring an f4 lens, I definitely would have been in trouble. So that would be the first point, is really taking into consideration is your choices of lighting and the availability of light to you. And that would be a reason to go from a kit lens that has an f4 to then investing in the f2.8. The second thing then I have to mention is if you are debating on a prime lens versus an f2.8 lens, specifically for the amount of light that it lets in, I would say that if you know your studio space ahead of time and you know how much room you have, and you can decide if you want a 35mm 35mm or a 50mm lens, and then you know you won't need 24-70 because you already have an idea of what space is available to you for your portraiture, then I would say absolutely opt to get a prime in your hands, because you're gonna have that extra light to play with. So that's really what's important, is ensuring that you have as much light as possible available to you.
Can we do one where you're like, you're kind of facing me now and you kind of have your blouse like, as if you're like, I'm gonna do it, don't laugh, but like, you're like, you know what I mean?
But I'm still kind of sitting on the edge.
Yeah, exactly.
Then the other aspect of that is if you actually have that background and that depth of field separation. Honestly, what I'll say is that yes, you will notice an f1.4 depth of field versus an f2.8. Is it really going to be make or break for most people? Probably not. That said, if you have the ability to get a prime with an f1.4 1.8, absolutely go for it, because your photos will only look better for it. Again, in my experience though, the f2.8 still does a really great job, so you won't be losing out on too much if you do decide to get a 24-70 f2.8 in that regard. And the final thing that I'll talk about for portraiture is distortion. Shooting at 35mm or 50mm is probably going to result in the least distortion possible for what images you are shooting. And that still is the case on a 24-70 lens. Once you bring your focal length to a 24 and a 70, it will result in having more distortion in your images than would have been if you had a 24 prime and a 70 prime.
Let's, you know, could be cool. Okay, so this is like absolutely a good photo. There's definitely something here. Like, what we could do is, maybe we tuck the left side of the dress shirt in so that we see that it's more of a dress shirt, and then look deadpan in the camera for me. If you smile and look down for me. Maybe we try using the ladder, and we have like, we'll put the swing back. And like what we saw with the half swing, and then we have your blouse kind of in the shot so that we have like a more detailed shot of you. That's so good. I love that. Keep looking out the window. Yes. Nice.
Obviously, the specialty lenses are made so that they shoot most accurately at those focal lengths, whereas typically the larger the spread on your lens, for instance, if you were to get a 35-105, the more distortion you would experience at those extreme focal lengths.
The hands on the chair and like more lean. Like, yeah, nice. Yes. The subtle little lean on the...
So really, should you consider a 24-70 f2.8 for your kit, even if you already have an f4 lens or even a 35 prime already? My recommendation would be yes. The first lens I actually bought from my 24-70 f4 kit lens was the f2.8 version, and specifically for that reason, it was to really bring up my production value and ensure that as a starting photographer, I could shoot whatever I wanted to, getting as close to all of the specialty lenses that I possibly could, whether I wanted to do a portrait session and would shoot it at f2.8 exclusively and 70mm, or I wanted to do lifestyle sessions, automotive photography, and had the ability to really show off the background. I know that these lenses can also be pricey when compared to a prime, but the worst thing that could happen is that you end up buying two primes, 35 and 50mm, and you lose out on having 24 and 70mm when you could have shot with a 24-70 for a year before you then realized what it is that you want to shoot, and you then can just pick what primes after the fact and save yourself the money instead of doubling up on lenses and spending more money in the long run and saving in the short term. What you want to do is the reverse of that, which is to spend more money in the short term in order to save in the long term, and the 24-70 is the best way to do that. If you did enjoy this video, please let me know, and if you want to see any other tips or my take on any other lenses in the future, please comment down below or send me a DM on Instagram. That being said, I'm going to cut the video off here, and I want to say thanks again for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.